Welcome to Second Look. I'm Todd Perkins, and you may not be able to tell the difference between me and my guest, which is my brother, also a pastor here at East North Church, Ethan Perkins. Hi, this is Ethan. I'm just kidding. That was really Todd.
I think you'll be able to tell a slight difference. I have a cold, so maybe that'll help. Maybe that'll distinguish us. I'm the one that
Could
sounds
be.
like a Charlie Brown character.
Yesterday, after church, ran into Stephen Wade. He was at El Mocajete, one of our favorite locations. And he said, I turned around because I heard Ray Romano, and I knew that it had to be either you or Ethan.
You're Ray, I'm Kermit. That's what it usually I hear.
All
Ray's
right.
more angry. No, Deborah.
Well, here to talk about a subject near and dear to our heart is suffering.
Mm-hmm.
Just kidding. Well, maybe not. I mean, first world problem is how I would define my experience of suffering for the most part, except for an occasional moment where I've had really bad stomach issues that really mess me up.
I will say, though, there is something, and I'm sure we'll talk about this, there is something to say, like, even the first world problems should be accounted as suffering. Something that you're suffering, not when the cable goes out, but like your suffering is the suffering you have and the suffering you receive. So there's always someone suffering worse than you.
That's true.
So to discount your suffering is not healthy or good. You got to recognize what is suffering to you.
Amy Gusevsky. Do you know her?
I know the name.
She's from Durham, friend of ours, and she's a clinical, counselor.
Smarter than us.
Yeah, definitely got more education, and she brought up the point that you don't get to decide what's traumatic. For other people, and I think so if we're approaching the subject of Job, who was a major sufferer of a lot of calamity, a lot fell apart for him. And we're ultimately asking the question: Is Jesus a better character? But in the midst of it, we're talking about the subject of suffering as a whole and going through hard things. It's good to remember, sure, maybe my experiences that are hard are not comparable to the difficult experiences of others, and I certainly understand that. But it's not a contest. And we're not trying to dismiss other people's suffering simply because they're not as difficult as other things that people have encountered.
Also, God being in control, God being aware of all things, knows you and gives you the suffering you can handle. I do think that, like, if handle's not maybe the best word, because I think we get
it's
more.
also like God gives me more than I can handle.
Yeah.
In fact, I think that the whole experience of suffering is meant to bring us to our knees, to cry out to God and say, I need your help and I need awareness of you, which is what Job does right off the bat.
That's what I was going to say. Your suffering, you get what you need. You get the suffering you need to bring you closer to God, which on our conditional human scale isn't fair. Even this morning, I told my daughter London, today you're going to get up. This is so funny. Get dressed, go to school. She's homeschooled.
Oh God!
And clean your room.
No.
And the suffering that occurred, and all this was to say, if you do this with a good attitude every day this week, I'll take you to see Frozen 2, which is coming out this weekend. Wow. So I was trying to set it up.
That's your approach to parenting.
Yes, I had dangled a carrot.
Of a Disney movie.
Hope. Well, like, here's what I had to hit her with, though, afterwards. I said, London, what I was saying was everything you need to do every day. There was nothing extra in that. You get up, you get dressed, you go to school, you help maintain the house and keep it clean. But her triggered of, I'm being suffered. I was giving them a bonus reward. There was a reward just for, hey, we'll do this anyways.
And the honest truth is, at the end of the day, you'll probably go in there and clean a room. And then you'll go to Disney anyway.
Yeah, we'll definitely, like, that's where that grace kind of comes in, like, that her reaction was so quick to be frustrated and angry, and why me? Oh my gosh, I can't handle it. Her favorite words are, it's not fair, and that reward is going to be there anyway, not based on, I definitely will not have a checklist of, did you pick this up? Did you do this type of school? I'll come in kind and go, great, let's go.
All right, I gotta change gears and keep us moving. Yesterday we had JayWill, church planner in resident at Riverside Community Church down in Columbia, South Carolina. James Walden's pastor there. They're an Acts 29 church. Good friends all around with their staff, and I've interacted with JayWill a good number of times. He reached out, or I reached out, I believe, and just invited him to come speak and share. Because I like church planners, and I like to see them have opportunities to share their vision and get a couple of opportunities to preach. So very thankful for his message, and that should be available on the regular podcast if you wanted to go check that out. Our effort will be to just try to give you, help bring to mind some themes and thoughts that might be helpful for your group this week. So that's the framework of JayWill and that kind of thing. But when I think of the book of Job, and I've read the book of Job several times, really a dozen times, and that's because I've read through the Bible a dozen times. But when I read through Job, I am looking for this validating reason that it would be like, oh, that's why he had to suffer. But there's not ever, every time I read it, I'm reading it with maybe this time I'll see why it was necessary. But the experience of reading it, even when God shows up at the end and more or less says, who are you to complain, or something on that level, it just doesn't feel all that redeeming or all that whatever. So I look at Job and say man, here's a guy who suffered, and it's difficult to find meaningfulness in his suffering. It just doesn't do it for me. I'm not rescued by the meaningfulness of Job's suffering. I'm foreshadowing to Jesus being better, but that's a reality that I struggle with when I read Job.
I read it differently. I always looked at it as bad things happen to good people. Not even in a positive way, but
bad things happen to people.
Yeah, period. But that was my lens growing up. Was there's the nice guy finishing last story. That was my take of it.
Just like Georgia Tech.
Yeah, I don't know if they're nice though. Who knows? No, it just was.
They wear
gold and white.
That's the heavenly colors,
not purple,
not red and black, which is clearly a picture of hell. Daniel Laredo, if you're listening, that was a stab directly at the UGA Bulldogs.
No, I've always read it as. I often looked at it like, God, maybe you could have intervened here to help this guy out, to just hand him over to Satan in a way. Was man, this guy was doing his best, seemed to be pretty good, and you're just going to use him as a test? What kind of thing is this? But
also, that scares me even to this day.
Yeah.
If there's this council where Satan gets to pick on somebody and, you're doing well, because at the beginning, Job's doing well. He's even making sacrifices every week, I just want to make sure my family's good. All is good. And there's some kind of council where Satan comes up and picks on somebody to pick on.
I think what the testimony of that, the security we have, is something that JayWill was pointing towards, and that's this is a vapor. When I hear that word, the life we live is a vapor. It's just nothing.
Vaping?
No, dang it! I knew you were going to say that. I always think of coffee in the morning when you put your coffee out in a mug and the steam comes up. And you're like, ooh, I should Instagram this. That, you don't have long. That the steam goes away quick because that vapor, and even quicker is it goes up about 6 inches and then it's gone. And, if that's what we're given here on earth, it's not to say this life is pointless and stupid, so go do whatever you want. It is to say that God, in his forever past, present, and future, looks at our life and goes, it's fleeting, it's so quick. And eternity is what I care about. And to me, God goes, Job's locked in for eternity. He's locked in. I know where Job's going to spend eternity. Right. Therefore, I can let all calamity, all travesty happen to him. Everything. Take away. That's why I love the way the story unfolds. It's how about we take his land? How about we take his animals? Okay, how about we take his kids? How about we give them boils? Like, it just kind of, you keep adding it up, and God goes, I don't think you get that none of this matters. Yeah. That Job is locked in. And that's where you kind of get this story of, is it 100% to be read authentic and true, or is it a tale that we've told to go that maybe the story is the security that God has is not in the righteousness of Job, but in the locked in eternity of his salvation, to go, Job can't get out of my hand.
Job's mine.
He's mine. You can do what you want with him. Clay pots scraping off boils and all. He's mine. I got him.
Well, to touch on a subject near and dear to a lot of our church's hearts is this reality of having a baby, right? A lot of that going around this past year. And there's, I don't know. I've never had a baby, so I can't really speak to the experience.
I don't think it's that bad. I think it's...
They're probably just making it up.
I will say my wife has had 4 children, and she's had like a dozen kidney stones.
Would you do it again? Would you have?
I'd do it in a heartbeat. It's nothing on my part, but no, she's had like a dozen kidney stones, and she has told me kidney stones are worse. Oh no, she's like, they're much worse.
Well, painful. There's not much redemption on the other side of a kidney stone, but like, you're ruining my analogy.
Sorry.
The experience that I've had is there's a lot of intense suffering, but the moment that child is there, it's sort of like it quickly fades like a vapor. Yeah. And that's my hope for the idea of eternity, which JayWill took us to, Revelation 21, this idea that all the sorrow, all the sadness, tears are wiped away, no more sickness, no more pain, no more suffering. Man, that's an exciting thing. And if we can, it's almost like we've got to tune in our hearts and our minds towards eternity and towards the gift of eternal security and the reality of what that looks like. We've got to learn how to tune our hearts into that to be able to navigate through the difficulty that we're facing.
The people I know that do this best are the people I know that have suffered the most. Like the people I know who can look at life on earth with an eternal view and not, they ran out of donuts at Krispy Kreme, what will I do? But can look at life with the eternal perspective of, this is fleeting and there is something that we have to look forward to, are the people who've been through the worst of the worst. And I can't fathom how I would react to go through some of the things my friends have gone through that is awful. I can't process, because I just think I'd end up like in a desert in Nevada, like crawling around crying, like that kind of level of I can't handle it. But those people, and I do think it is a special grace, a special kindness, a special mercy that God gives to people that are going to go through some things that are harder. That's why, when you think about, I can't imagine going through that. And then if you go through it, it's often that you go, I don't know how I did it. I don't know how I suffered through that and still have a perspective that God is good and better than this. We didn't even really get to what Jesus has done that makes him better. I think the Jesus is better question is funny, because every time we present a character on Sunday that we're going to talk about, like I'm sure David's coming up, like David, and instantly, yeah, Jesus is way better. We can skip that. We did do David. Yeah, that was right. I was definitely paying attention.
Yeah, absolutely.
And not on Instagram or Facebook with Stephen Wade.
I know. That never happens.
No.
All right, so let me just throw this out there as a possible resource. It's kind of a hefty treatment on the subject, but it's really good. And it's a book by Dr. Tim Keller.
Who?
It is Timothy Keller.
He must be new.
Yeah.
It's just getting started. Nice of you to plug his
Walking with God in Pain and Suffering.
Mm.
Now, one of the things that I remember in that book that he brings up early on is this idea that like other cultures view personal suffering quite differently. In America, and JayWill talked about this at the beginning, like in America, like we're avoiding suffering at all costs. Anything that we can do to make life easier, and his point yesterday was that causes us to be like twice as traumatic in our responses to small things, because like we're not used to, like the greatest generation which we would boomer them these days. But like the greatest generation and before them, I guess it would be the generation before them.
Be their worthless kids is what we would be picking on.
Well,
they fought a war to come back and have a family.
I'm a big fan of like World War II movies and like part of Band of Brothers and Midway and all that kind of stuff. Like because I look at what they go through and I always come out more sober about my suffering and go like, man, what am I complaining about? Like I go to the movie and watch guys like have to find their arm, like in Saving Private Ryan, and I'm like, here I am mad because I can't find my keys. That guy had his arm blown off.
So when I was sick a few weeks back, I had a really bad infection. It resulted in tons of sores in my mouth, and I was fevers for like a week.
That was nasty.
It was awful. But I just was watching things because I was just exhausted, and so I rewatched Band of Brothers. And about one episode in, like about 17 seconds in, I couldn't have felt more like a pathetic loser. I'm like in bed, can't move, and these guys have like bullet holes in them, and I'm like, I must stay in bed. I couldn't do anything. And like, so that's another matching up that my suffering compared to their suffering. That's not the point. The point is you're in this suffering for a reason, and it's to point you to an eternal perspective, of what God has for you and is doing for you and has done for you. And we find that in Jesus. We find that answer, not in ourselves, not in our ability to do good works, but in what Jesus has done for us and is still doing for us.
Right. So other cultures see suffering as meaningful and something that's going to be formative for your life. And I think the gospel gives us that perspective too. And we're just hinting at it. The idea that Jesus, the experience of the gospel is going to provide us a framework to provide some relief to our suffering and perspective to our suffering. Whereas, we might look at Job and struggle to find a meaningful reason. Why did he suffer? I don't quite get it. But when we hear about Jesus and his suffering, we've got this framework and we've got an understanding. He suffered to free us from our suffering, ultimately. And that's the hope that we have together. All right, so we've gone a little overboard, but thanks for being here, Ethan. It was fun. Yep, good to get in as many movie references as we can on Second Look.
Go see Frozen 2 this weekend.
Unbelievable.